Hi there. Welcome to Raising Mommy. Today's show is brought to you by Emory Women's Center at Findlay. As part of Emory Healthcare, the largest and most comprehensive hospital system in Atlanta, Emory Women's Center at Findlay offers women the highest level of care. Whether you're looking for a gynecologist for your annual well woman checkup, or an obstetrician for pregnancy care, or a reproductive health specialist, Emory Women's Center at Findlay is known for outstanding women's health care. Our physicians provide general gynecological care for women of all ages, including all dimensions of pregnancy and prenatal care, as well as preventative women's health education and management. You can depend on unparalleled medical care delivered by specialists who work with you to develop a personalized treatment plan. For patient appointments, call 404-778-3401. Emory Women's Center at Findlay is located at 12,000 Findlay Road, Johns Creek, Georgia, 30097. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Raising Mommy, a podcast sanctuary where moms can come to listen, share, learn, and grow. I am your host, Kimberly Tyson, vegan blogger for eatplantsforlife.com, wife and mom of two. On today's podcast, I have the pleasure of chatting with Dr. Mike Brooks. Dr. Brooks co-authored the book, Tech Generation, Raising Balanced Kids in a Hyper-Connected World. He, along with co-author Dr. John Lasser, have written a book that addresses a hot-button topic for parents who struggle with what feels like the technology apocalypse, or screen time tug-of-war. How much is too much? Where's the balance? And how do I get my kids from texting me about more screen time? Dr. Brooks is a licensed psychologist and a licensed specialist in school psychology. He has a wealth of expertise in positive psychology, the needs of children and teens, and effective parenting. His website, techhappylife.com, is devoted to the challenges of living in a balanced life in a hyper-connected world. Thank you, Dr. Brooks, for graciously joining us today.
My pleasure.
Today's Real Chat segment is titled Tech Generation. Mom, can I have more screen time? I love the first sentence on your website. Technology is woven into our lives. The genie is out of the bottle, and there's no stuffing the genie back in. What was your goal in writing the Tech Generation?
Well, my co-author, Dr. John Lasser, and I are both parents and had, our share of struggles with raising our own kids. We're both psychologists as well and in practice. So and I did my dissertation research on the effect of video game violence on kids. So I've had a long-standing interest in technology and how it affects kids and, the rest of us as well. And what we saw is there's a need for a balanced book, because there's some out there that, it runs the gambit of some trying to vilify technology and a certain level of alarmism. And then, some are coming at it from a parenting angle, but don't have the psychology background. And we felt like, we work with clients and parents and kids with these struggles. As parents, we've had our own struggles, and then as psychologists, just understanding like child development, adolescent development, cognitive development, those types of things, and kind of pull it all in together, see what the research says, and then give practical recommendations on some things we can do to strike the right balance.
I do like the fact that in your book you don't bash technology. You see that there's a need for it. Explain why it's not an either-or approach.
Well, life is complicated, and I think there's a tendency of every generation to look at the younger generation and what they're doing and do some level of generational finger wagging and saying, look at these kids these days, whether it's, rock and roll music and Elvis shaking his hips to television, video games, and now it's our screens, smartphones, and social media of some level of like, kids are going to hell in a handbasket.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly we benefit from technology. There's so many advantages with productivity, the entertainment options, connecting with others, um, uh, social media,
Mm-hmm.
and we can educate ourselves in ways that weren't possible before. But with all those, you can't have pros without the cons. So we look at it as a medium, and within this medium, there's just a host of pros and cons, and there's no way to have one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
So the same social media that was used to do the ice bucket challenge and raise money for Lou Gehrig's disease to fight that horrible disease. Well, then you have cyberbullying. You can't have the advantage of one without opening the door to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we see it is trying to understand what the pros and cons are better,
Mm-hmm.
and more judiciously use our technology more mindfully, so that we don't use it reflexively, reactively or habitually, but it's more strategic so that we can get more of the pros and fewer of the negatives.
You mentioned the pros and cons, and I do. I recently, my daughter, I have two daughters. They're both in middle school. One's in sixth grade and one is in eighth. And I got to see the pros and the cons during she had a sleepover for her birthday. And the pro, I would say, would be that her friends were gathered and they were playing a video game where they were singing and dancing and having fun. So she got the social aspect. It was physical activity, and they got to learn about each other. I would say the con was the next morning. They were in the basement, and I had to come downstairs and wake them all up. And it was really quiet. As I was walking downstairs, and I thought, "Wow, these girls are still asleep." Well, all but one girl was on her phone,
Yeah.
and they weren't engaged with each other, but
Yeah.
they woke up to the phone, and I was like, wow, this is a lot
Yeah.
different than when I was a kid.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing that I I worry about. I'm a big believer in relationships and that they're essential to our well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And we can reflect on our own lives to see the truth of this. The happiest moments in our life, the deepest level of joy and life satisfaction come from interacting with one another in person, and that's how we evolved. Like 99.9% of our evolutionary history was in small nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes of 50 to 150 people,
Mm-hmm.
and all social interaction took place in person. So we are hardwired to interact with one another in person, and the disconnect comes from kids, young people. Is like, well, this is just what we do these days. We text, we're on Snapchat, we interact on our phones. Well, people are looking at it in the wrong timeline. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is very foreign. In the same way, eating the types of foods we eat today, it's caused an obesity epidemic. The amount of foods we eat and the types of foods we eat, we have an obesity epidemic in America, and it's spreading throughout the world. And it's because we evolved to eat foods that were very different than
Mm-hmm.
we're eating today. And so my concern is that these ways that are fundamental to our well-being are getting the squeeze, and we're starting to live in a way that's very incongruent with our evolutionary heritage. And if we do that too much, we pay a price, and in terms of our happiness and our well-being. So your example's a perfect one, and I'll give one of my own that is sort of similar, um, on both sides of the coin. So, and I'll do this quickly, but just sort of highlights. We were going, my family, on a vacation, and we were at the airport. I have three boys, a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And my wife and I generally try to limit their screen time, but we give them their game time and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
we're waiting at the airport, And at that point, we were saying no screen time till you get on the plane. And then, we're up in the air, and then you can pull out your screens for a period of time. Well, my 7-year-old was just sitting around, and this mother with her 15-month-old comes up, and she's waiting too. And the 15-month-old had a ball, and he was throwing it around. And my 7-year-old started Torben, he started playing with the 15-month-old, and you could just see the delight in the 15-month-old, and my 7-year-old Torben was having a great time. And for 30-40 minutes they played together, and I was enjoying it. My wife was, the little 15-month-old's mother was enjoying it, and I was like thinking, wow, it's so deep and meaningful. It's like,
Right.
How do you quantify? How can you put numbers on what that does? And I'd say that was a high quality, deep social interaction.
Wow.
And instead of, if he were playing Geometry Dash on the iPad, he would have missed that. And so would the little kid Tio. He would not have had that experience, and neither would my wife and I and the other boy's mother.
Wow.
And I'm just thinking, that's really important to carve that out. And that's where I think we lose some things. Now, on the flip side, at a soccer tournament, when in a weekend soccer tournament, my 12-year-old was at, my 12-year-old does not have his smartphone yet. All the other kids did, and they were all playing a game together at a big table in between soccer games at the hotel, and all the kids were having a good time, and my son was left out.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, he was a good sport about it, but all the other kids, they were talking, they were interacting, they were laughing, and I thought, these kids are having a good time. I don't want to like finger wag and say that they're not.
Right.
But then I felt like, gosh, my son sort of missed out on that one because I had put a limit on his screen time. So,
Wow. Yeah.
what I'm saying is, like, I just want them to have both. It's not a either or, it's a both and. It's have those in-person interactions and have some fun on the screen, but just don't let the screen time eclipse the in-person interaction and things like sleep, that are so important to our well-being.
I think too, I actually started to notice the change a couple of Christmases ago. My husband and I were so confused because when we were kids, on Christmas morning, you opened your gifts, but you would see a rush of kids outside with their new bikes or all of their outdoor toys. And for the past few Christmases, I've noticed that no one comes outside on Christmas Day anymore. They're inside with their joysticks and, new toys that are electronic. And I thought, this is so different than when we were kids.
It is. And I feel your pain there. Like I when I present to groups, I'll ask, like, how many of you in your youth spent more time playing outdoor group games than you think your kids do? And almost every hand shoots up. And I used to play hide and go seek and tag and wolf across the river. We had all these group games, and the kids were already outside. One is you just, say, hey, let's play, and gather up all the kids, or you'd knock on some doors. And we'd go, and we were running around all day long playing these games. And I part of me doesn't want to do the generational finger wagging, but another part of me goes, that was something special to be out there. And I think when the kids are just indoors playing Fortnite and stuff like that, not that that's inherently bad. I just think they're not getting the other good stuff, not as much of it. So I prefer to look at it that way instead of saying Fortnite's bad for kids, which I don't think it is. But I think too much Fortnite is, and frankly, too much of anything is, whether it's a TV show or you're, on YouTube, or even you're learning to program. If you're in the house 6 hours a day learning to program, as a kid, oh, great, you'll have your future set, but you know what? You're missing out on your childhood and you're not playing with your friends while
Right.
you're programming.
Right.
So that's kind of how I look at it.
So, what is techno judgment, and why should that be avoided?
That's about that generational finger wagging of looking at kids and in particular, it could be looking at other parents and the
Mm-hmm.
way they allow their kids to play on screens or certain video games. But the most common for us parents is to like look at the kids and the teens and say, "Oh, look at these kids on their iPhones and iPads and playing Fortnite. We used to go outside. We used to do this." And the truth is, and we all know this to be true, is the only reason we weren't on smartphones as kids is because we didn't have them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if they were there, guarantee I would have been all over that,
Yep.
social media, and especially the video games. I mean, I played the ones growing up, Pac-Man and Galaga
Yep.
and Donkey Kong, Centipede, all those. My generation ushered in the video game era, and I played them all at the arcades. I played them at home, but they just weren't engaging enough to sit there for 3 or 4 hours.
Right.
You'd get bored. You could only blast so many Space Invaders before you were ready to go outside. So
Yeah.
I think kids don't like to be judged. They don't like to be told they're addicted. They don't like to be looked down upon for their tech use. That's not going to get us anywhere. It's just going to upset them, especially as they get into tweens and teens. They just start to
Exactly.
resent that. So I want to avoid that. And also it's the kind of perspective taking of knowing that we'd be doing the exact same things if we were growing up now too. So
And I think
that's,
to some degree, when we were kids, it was just a different type of screen time because,
yeah,
and I use my husband as an example. He played outside when he could, but when it was dark, he would go in and watch TV all night. And to this
yeah,
day, he knows every 80s movie ever created.
yeah,
And then the following day, I mean, I think he had an Atari, so that started
yeah,
that.
yep.
But the next day, I would notice, because I actually knew him in high school, I
Oh,
noticed
wow.
that he slept in class. So
Yeah,
technology affected his sleep, and it
yeah,
affects our kids' sleep now.
yes, yeah. And that's one of those that, I'm kind of in the same boat. Like I watched, I'd say too much TV. I mean,
Hmm.
not like crazy amounts, but probably typical amount of a kid, which arguably is too much.
Right.
But yeah, the staying up late, like it happened when we were young. And one thing I like to, tell parents is like, if we're flipping our lids, like we're going bonkers over this. I know one of your podcasts was on anxiety and depression.
Hmm.
And one of the things is, as parents, if we're freaking out over this doesn't do our kids any good. Like they pick up on our anxiety.
Right.
So we need to kind of manage our own state of being about this and kind of keep a cool head and realize, look, we didn't grow up perfectly as
Hmm.
kids. I could list a host of things. I know you're vegan. I grew up, I didn't eat any vegetables basically. And
Hmm.
as much as my parents tried, and then I became vegetarian later on, and now I
Right.
eat super healthy. And it's like, well, kind of an epic fail of like way too much sugar when I was young,
Hmm.
way too few vegetables, junk food junkie. But now, I run marathons, I work out, and it's like a lot comes out in the wash. So what
Right.
I'm looking at is kind of tweaking things and massaging things to improve them rather than, being an alarmist and saying, "Oh my gosh, if these kids they don't get it under control, their lives are going to be ruined. They'll never
Right.
learn to look someone in the eye and interact face to face." And it's like, no, I don't think that's true. But the other is, could they make some changes like sleep you mentioned?
Hmm.
That need for sleep is not going away. That is
Right.
fundamental to our well-being. As they in the podcast, they probably you covered the importance of sleep. Is sleep deprivation is associated with probably every major negative health outcome you can think of, physical and psychological. So, one thing is it may be not Fortnite or Snapchat that's causing problems. It's that they're up at, 1 a.m. playing Fortnite or Snapchatting. That's the problem. Okay. So, sleep is just, it's so hard for kids to put these down because they're so compelling and there's so much to do. But the need for sleep has not changed, and there's a lot of kids and a lot of adults, frankly, too, that are getting we're shaved off about an hour to 2 hours of sleep compared to about 30-40 years ago, and that's disastrous on health. So as a parent, and for your listeners, one of the fundamental is like a hard red line on sleep. That of where we're going to draw lines on screen use is that they get to bed at a reasonable time. And that is probably, we get the most bang for the buck in terms of improved outcomes by ensuring that our kids get a healthy amount of sleep.
What is the family assessment of screen time?
So my colleague, Dr. Lasser, and I came up with that because what we were noticing is that we have a curious blind spot when it comes to our screen time use. And this is when we've used it with audiences, and we've used it with kids and teens. And the thing we notice is people will rate themselves. So it's a rating form from 0 to 10, and it's rate your screen time, like do you use not enough, be 0 or 1, 5 would be it's a moderate, it's an okay amount, it's kind of balanced, the high end of the scale, 9 or 10 would be overuse. So you can rate yourself, and then family members, each of them rate themselves, then you can rate other family members.
Okay.
And the thing that emerges from that, and this isn't scientifically validated, but it's more of a qualitative way of looking at things, but it's meant to start a conversation, is in a relationship, it only takes one person to say screen time's a problem for it to be a problem. So if I think my screen use is fine and it bothers my wife, it's a problem. I don't get to say it's not a problem. So this is a way to give everyone a voice and also look at other people's perceptions and perspectives about their screen use to get feedback so they could make adjustments. And it's not to shame, it's not to finger wag or finger point. We've got to be open-minded. But it's also for parents to hear from their kids, because there's a fairly high percentage of kids who view their parents as addicted to their devices. I think the Common Sense Media poll from 2016, a survey had it was 28% of teens viewed their parents as addicted to their screens.
Wow.
Which is over half of is about half as much as parents viewed their teens as addicted. And that was 2016. I mean, there's parents, I've had literally teens in my office crying because their parents would not get off the phone and talk to them. Like when they'd pick them up from school, they were on Bluetooth calls or, on Facebook or whatever when they'd get home, and they wouldn't come up from the screen.
Right.
And it bothers kids. It bothers kids to be fubbed, snubbed with a phone by their peers. So they recognize it, but it's odd that we have this thing where we don't see it in ourselves. It's like it's in the New Testament. It's don't pick at the splinter in your brother's eye when there's a plank in your own.
Yes.
it's one of those things. And there's a term, cognitive bias, called illusory superiority. Most people think they're above average across a range of different attributes. So, for instance, most people think they're an above average driver, but statistically, most people cannot be above average. So, most people think their tech use is okay, maybe it's a little bit much,
Right.
but they think other people have a problem. And that's one of the things that we find in that family assessment of screen time. But it's a tool to create a conversation, and through that conversation, we can make adjustments in our screen time.
You stress the importance of building a nurturing, solid relationship with our kids as the foundation for creating that balance. How so?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research that shows healthy attachments with our kids are good for them.
Right.
And so if we're securely attached, and not to go into too much of the research on that, but it really shows that having a warm, supportive relationship with limit setting, so they call that authoritative parenting,
Mm-hmm.
is a style of parenting where it's kind of like the Goldilocks thing. It's not too much of anything. You have your warmth and support, and you have limit setting, consequences, and stuff like that. And it's developmentally sensitive, so when kids are younger, we have to step in more and manage more. As
Mm-hmm.
they become older, we have to back off and allow our teens more autonomy, because the goal is self-regulation. And if we regulate everything for our kids, they never learn to use that skill or develop that skill effectively. So that's with the basis of our parenting around screen time is really just around parenting in general. So in that sense, I don't view screens as a separate category altogether. It's subsumed in our general parenting. And when we say, how do we parent? Well, we use an authoritative parenting style, which is that warmth and support combined with some limit setting. So that's what we advocate. And then we talk about in the book, in Tech Generation, how our leverage of influence as a parent is based on the strength of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So the stronger the relationship we have with our kids, the more we can influence them through recommendations, rule setting, limit setting, advice. They're more likely to listen and follow through if we have a strong relationship. Okay. So if our whole relationship is based on just managing their behavior, that's and telling them, did you get your homework done? Did you pack your backpack? Do you have your soccer cleat? All that to-do list items. That's not really a relationship. So we invest in our relationship with our kids to create that strong relationship, so that allows us to use the limit setting with the screens and the rules, and they're more likely to listen and follow through.
So you mentioned the authoritative parenting. That's the goal of the 4 parenting styles. I like the example that you gave in your book about the child that wanted the video game that has some violence in it. You mentioned that there's a 3-step ACT model: acknowledge, communicate, and target. Can you explain that?
Right. So if this is good communication with our kids, you want to, if they're upset with something, like let's say playing a video game and you're setting a limit on a screen time, and they're reactive, you want to acknowledge their feelings. So that's really important. Is in a neuropsychiatrist, Dan Siegel, talks about this, is people want to feel felt. And so I always like that, is when kids are upset with something, we need to acknowledge their feelings right away. And then that, I see, Johnny, you're really upset that screen time is over. I'm sorry you're feeling so upset by this. It's the communication. So you're acknowledging, you're communicating, and you're targeting their behavior. So whatever it was that they were doing, if they crossed a limit, you want to set that limit, communicate it clearly. And then another thing to do is to give them something else to do so that you can help transition them. So I use this a lot with my kids. So if ending the iPad game time is upsetting, hear their feelings, empathize, but that doesn't mean give in.
Right.
So that's a really important point is we want, and a real common thing is kids will think if they just explain it to you, you'll understand. And if you understand, you'll give them what they want. Those are different things. So that's where the communication comes in. I know you're really upset right now. I know you'd like to continue. Your game time is over. So you're communicating the limit. And then one of the targets can be give them something else to do to transition to. So you get their attention on something else, because otherwise they can just be left in their emotional state, which can be a difficult place. And a lot of kids don't know how to transition to something else. Right. So it could be, I see you're upset. The time is up. You need to turn off the iPad. Now, my caveat here is kids will always say, I'm in a level. Right. I want to get my kids a T-shirt that says that I'm in a level, because it's like, so one is on our end, we need to give them forewarning. You have an hour of game time, but then you have 10 minutes left, you have 5 minutes left. So wrap up now, don't start another level.
Right.
And then when they are done, and that can be tough. If they need a couple extra minutes to finish, I usually give it to them, because it can be traumatic for kids to just unplug them. Right. If you just take the iPad and snatch it out of their hands, I guarantee it's a meltdown. And we have to understand that kids might have taken, weeks to get up to a certain boss in a right. level. And if you just close the iPad, it's really traumatic. Yeah. So I would really avoid doing that at all costs. If it's a recurring problem, you solve the problem outside of when the problem's happening. So when they're having trouble transitioning, you want to kind of do the act right then and there. But and give them a little leeway if needed. And then at the end, it could be, okay, if they're still upset, is you give them something else to do. Let's go outside now and throw the football.
So it's like a distraction.
Well, it is, but I would look at it as another engagement. Okay. So I'm not using something nefarious or underhanded or manipulative. I'm actually trying to engage them in another activity. So that's why you do acknowledge the emotions on the front end. So you don't want to sweep those under the rug, but you do, kids can have a hard time transitioning once the time's up, or they're just upset about anything, is you acknowledge the feelings and everything and connect with them. And then you're showing that I want to engage with you and help you transition out of this. Let's do something fun together. And also that's good for the relationship. You're doing right. something fun with our kids. It deepens that relationship. It's also something they can go back to. That my feeling is that if kids have had enough of the good stuff, they'll always want to go back to it, because they recognize on a deep level it is need satisfying to be in relationship with others. Okay. So yeah, that's, and it's no matter how you do it, you could read 1,000 parenting books. And as you know, as a parent, what works great with one child doesn't necessarily work great with another.
Absolutely.
And there's just a lot of in the trenches that we have to do as parents, where it's hard, even under best circumstances. I've had my kids, melt down plenty of times over screen stuff. I had a little one yesterday that was just, I just, one is as parents, we got to keep our own calm.
Yep.
And if it's a recurring problem that we see, then we want to troubleshoot it outside of when the problem is happening. Trying to think on the fly to come up with something, or reacting emotionally and saying, well, that's it, no more iPad for you. We can't even enforce that, that's shooting ourselves in the foot. So we have to be calm, get with our partner, and then we talk about it, and maybe we'll get to it. But collaborative problem solving is a great approach.
So is this where we would use the Tech Happy Life model?
Yeah, well, so the Tech Happy Life model is we talked about the relationship earlier, and that's the bottom part of the model. So the model is a pyramid, and so at the bottom we have build the relationship, investing in the relationship. On the one level above that is the green light or preventative level, and then one level above that we have the yellow light level, which is address problems as they're emerging, kind of nip them in the bud. And then the last level is the red light, where things are out of control and we really have to step in because it could be a safety issue, or it's a very deep chronic problem where we have to step in more forcefully to rein things in and get them back under control. Okay. So ideally, like we don't even work the green light preventative level. We invest in the building the relationship as a foundation upon which the rest of the model works. Because if we don't have that strong relationship, it's less likely our kids will listen to us. But then the green light preventative is the where we get in a way the most bang for our buck, just like the public health, eating healthy foods, exercising, getting regular sleep, not drinking too much, or not smoking. Those are preventative things, that behaviors that prevent a lot of health problems that would come if you engaged in those behaviors. So by engaging in preventative behaviors, you prevent those problems, and it's much less costly. So by being overweight, then the doctor might say, well, you need to take statins or something like that. And so that's a yellow light. And then the red light might be you need to have insulin or medication for type 2 diabetes, or you need a triple bypass. That's the last place you want to intervene if you can help it. So this is based on a public health model approach. So the preventative strategies include things like not allowing kids to have technology before they're ready to have it, like letting an 8-year-old have a smartphone, their own smartphone. Well, that's what opens a bit of Pandora's box, and it's hard to take it back once you give the kids the technology. So we want to, as much as we can, limit some things on the front end, not having a screen in their room at night. That prevents a lot of problems, and helps them get the much needed sleep. So engaging them in other activities is another one, and it's not, a distraction or anything. It's that if they're playing soccer, one, they get the benefits of soccer in their in-person interactions, the outdoors, the physical activity. But while they're playing soccer, they can't be playing Fortnite simultaneously, so it naturally displaces it. So I'm not for overscheduling kids, but we do want to get them plugged into other activities that naturally limit screen time.
I actually, personally, I miss the green level. My husband and I decided that we were definitely in the yellow zone. So, but we do have some things that we do, and I was happy to see that they were also in your book. We do have a screen time curfew during the week. I have a iPhone, iPad docking station that's away from the kids, that they have to turn their things in at night, which we just started doing that about a month ago, and I'm so glad we're doing it because I noticed in the beginning that I would hear little dings in the like at 11 o'clock at night. They were getting text,
Right. Yes,
and I could hear
exactly.
them in the
Yeah.
morning, and I thought, wow, I'm so glad we decided to do this, and they really didn't put up a fight about it,
Oh,
which I
that's
thought that they
great.
would, but they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also
Eh,
have app and content limitations, which
uh-huh.
thank you, Apple, for doing that. So we did
Yes.
start doing that. So if they want a particular app, they have to get a request from me, which can be a bit of a problem if, say, they're off from school and I'm at work and they're asking to get apps or to go to a website and they all have to come through me. But it's definitely worth it. And I do make them pay for their own apps. So if they
Yeah,
want,
that's a great one too. Yeah.
yeah, I actually do that. And then we limit weekday screen time. We don't allow them to use their phones at the dinner table, which we've been
Yep.
doing that for quite a while.
Yeah.
They don't have social media accounts. They're both in middle school. This one we're going to revisit because my daughter, she's going into high school. So we'll have to have a really in-depth conversation, my husband and I, about that one. Um, they have to do their homework first before they get on their screens.
Uh-huh.
And when their grades drop, we do suspend the use during the week until the grade comes up.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
we do
Those
that.
Yeah, those are a whole lot of strategies that I think they're in the book and that are effective and again, every parent and child are a bit different. So we
Hmm.
have like general principles and ideas and we try to institute those, but then each family might need to massage a few things and like with my three boys, since they all like video games and watching movies. When probably every parent that has multiple kids runs into this, like you're able to manage it with the first child a
Hmm.
lot better, and then the second one wants to do what the first one is do, whatever
Right.
screen they're doing. So our our bar has dropped on like what we tolerate from
Right.
each kid, and that's it's almost unavoidable. Like if you can't rule with an iron fist. You have to be flexible and adapt to the circumstances. So there's general principles and guidelines we try to use, and kind of to me, it goes back to that parent-child relationship that we
Right.
can't go wrong with having a healthy relationship with our kids. And then a lot of the do's and don'ts,
Hmm.
I feel like we have to find what works for our family and keep in mind that you know a lot of it comes out in the wash.
Right.
So it's the extremes we want to really guard against. Again, like the sleep would be one, or a 4-year old playing an M-rated game like Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto. I mean,
Right.
they don't even have research on what the effects that would be, because it would be unethical to run the study,
Right.
you know. Uh, but yeah, I think if we set some reasonable limits and they're getting those benefits of the screen, yes, they can interact with their friends. Yes, they can play a bunch of fun games, and they're getting outside and they're playing soccer and they're doing family game night or,
Right.
whatever it is. So then they're getting the whole gambit. And I feel like that's a safe bet,
Right.
like if I had to place my bets on what's going to produce the best outcome, that would be it in that area. But then, not to freak out about it along the way, because I'm
Right.
living proof that you don't have to grow up, perfectly to.
Right. We all turn out fine.
Yeah, yeah. For the most part, like a lot of it comes out in the wash, so we have to keep that in mind. And so that's the odd part is I don't I mean, I wrote a book with Dr. Lasser on this. I believe it's enough of a concern that we should do some things about it. At the same time, freaking out about it doesn't help, and a lot comes out in the wash. But I think if we take those reasonable limits and we put them in on the front end, kids won't miss it. It just becomes, this is how we do it.
Right.
We don't have screens at the dinner table. If you've already built that in, they don't miss it.
Right.
Not having screens, because they've just grown accustomed to it.
Right. We, speaking of being in the yellow light level, we recently, I would say about a month and a half ago, my daughter, the sixth grader, we call her the mastermind,
Uh-huh.
she figured out my code. So I don't know. She
Uh-huh.
was looking over my shoulder. She figured out the code to the phone, and she gave it to her sister, her older sister. And so I noticed that no one was asking me for screen time. And I
Uh-huh.
thought, something's up. So I figured out that she got the code. So we had to put some consequences in place.
Right.
So we had to
Right.
take the phones away. We took them away for a weekend. And I noticed that at this level, you mentioned in your book that there should be consequences.
Correct. Yes. And ideally, we talk about those on the front end, some do's and don'ts, and what are the consequences of misuse. So if they, make in-app purchases without maybe they take the credit card or whatever, they get up at 2 a.m. and are Snapchatting or playing Fortnite, that we have already discussed what are the consequences. And a big one is the punishment should fit the crime,
Right.
too. I say this in the book, but a good rule of thumb for all parenting is use the least amount of consequence necessary to produce the desired result.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can take away the phone for a weekend, you don't need to take it away for a week. If
Right.
if that gets the change in behavior, it's not about like, let me stick it to them and show them who's boss. It's let me be an effective parent. And for my kids, the loss of screen time, like even for an afternoon, I could probably get them to jump through hoops of fire to keep their screen time.
Right.
Like I don't need to, and it's not an idle threat. It's matter of fact. Hey, if you do not, finish that game in the next 2 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
you will lose screen time for the afternoon, and that does it. They rarely ever cross the line, but I wouldn't need to say you'll lose it for a week.
Right.
That's not even necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So why do it? And the other is it can get difficult for us as parents. Like if we took away their cell phone a week and then maybe they're in volleyball and you have to like coordinate all this stuff, and now they don't have a cell phone,
Right.
and you can't, you have to you're like, oh my God,
More
I
work for
really
you.
shot my, yeah. Now what am I going to do? I took it away too long. So, as parents, we do want consequences, but, use the least amount. And if it's a recurring problem, that's evidence that what we have doesn't work.
Mm.
So then we need to sit down and we talk about this in the book, collaboratively problem solve is bringing the kids in and talking about, hey, I notice you want to be on the phone later at night and you're Snapchatting, and it's been a couple times now where you've gotten in trouble for that. And we don't want to like keep imposing consequences. We'd like, to change this. Let's see if we can come up with a different plan here. And that's given the kids a voice. Now that doesn't mean they get to dictate how it is, but we're giving them skin in the game by having this conversation. And this is especially important as they get older and as teens about, when we step in and what are the types of consequences, but we want to give them a say-so, and perhaps we can reach some kind of compromise that works for both parties, and then we try it out and see if it works.
So, what are some of the signs parents can watch out for in determining if their household is at the red light level?
Well, so there's research on this too to show that, and there's a controversy in the research. Like
Mm.
one of the questions is how bad are screens, and you'll get the gambit from people saying, and this is based on research, some saying, well, it's much ado about nothing. Really, this is another version of a moral panic. Then you have some people who are like, this is like digital heroin. Kids are going to hell in a handbasket because of screens. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to a generation of kids. And I definitely don't think it's that bad. But the research seems to show that kids who are very depressed and anxious and have psychological issues tend to use the screens more. So when we see kids with psychological issues and it's like, oh, it's because they're playing, Fortnite 4 or 5 hours a day, or they're Snapchatting all the time. In effect, that's more of a symptom of an underlying problem, not the cause of the problem itself. Now, my counter argument would be it could exacerbate problems, because staying up till 2 a.m. Snapchatting for a teen who's already depressed is going to make them more depressed when they're that sleep deprived.
Right.
But like chronic sleep deprivation is one of those red light things that if they're chronic sleep deprived, that's going to cause problems. Another is failing grades, like not just a little slipping, it's like, oh, they were all A's and now they're A's and B's.
Right.
How much do you want to like step in on that? Parents differ, but like if they're failing their classes because they're, that's a red flag. Now, again, that may not be because of their screens. And I would say it's unlikely. It's just because of their screens. They're probably using the screens, as you mentioned earlier, a distraction. The screens can be so immersive and consuming of our attention that they can push out negative thoughts and feelings about the self, the world, and the future. So in effect, these depressed teens, these anxious teens, are on the screens as a means to keep their minds occupied, because what'll fill the void are these negative thoughts and feelings. So we have to be careful not to just over focus on the screens as the problem and look at the big picture. So a few other red light areas would be that they're stealing credit card numbers to make in-app purchases. I would include texting and driving.
Oh, yeah.
Sharing nudes, that they could be charged with possession of child pornography. So those can be like, it doesn't have to be a recurring negative overuse of the screens. It could be certain types of use of the screens that, is crossing the line, and that we have to step in, just like drunk driving, with our kids. It's like, hey, they only need to do that once and that could be it, so right. That's not something we play around with. And if kids are doing things like texting and driving, it's dangerous. It's very dangerous.
It's a safety issue.
Yeah, it's a safety issue. And when it gets to that level, we have to step in more. And the red light is about using more controlling measures as a parent. In effect, part of parenting is helping kids learn to use freedom in a responsible way, and to self-regulate. So if we look at those as overarching goals of growing up, and the parenting is, we need to give them opportunities to practice using liberty and freedom in responsible ways. Because otherwise, how are they going to learn?
Right.
However, if they misuse them, then we need to take back the reins, or rein them in a bit, and then get things back under control, and then work back toward them getting more freedom again. Because we can't, if we had to take away their smartphone because they were doing things they shouldn't, and really crossing the line, well, it doesn't have to be all or none. It could be we take it away during the school day, or that they only have it for certain times during the day, and they have to turn it in at 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. or whatever. So it doesn't have to be all or none, but eventually we're going to need to give them the freedom back, because we can't limit them forever. And once they go off to college, if they don't know how to use freedom those kids can go absolutely bananas when they finally get a taste of it.
Right. Do you believe in screen time contracts?
I don't use them for my own kids. I'm not aware of any research about them that says that they're effective or ineffective. I just don't think it's been studied, at least at the last look that I had at the literature. I think they could be effective for some families. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Screenagers. Did you see?
No.
So that's one they show in schools a lot, and I've moderated it sometimes, like done the Q&A after the screening of it. But the mom's a pediatrician, and she does this documentary on screens and how they affect teens, and then they talk some about their own daughter, and when she got her smartphone, they did a like 5-page contract with her. She really didn't like it, and that came up, and that it only worked when she got more input in it, and they shortened it. So like if you're going to do a contract, one, there's a few principles, and I would say you involve the child. Like it's not all top down. Again, that's puts us in a power position, and how are they going to learn, to exercise this freedom responsibly if we do it all top down. And then we use the least amount of rules and restrictions possible. And, we just can't cover every base because it creates this really long, cumbersome contract. And if we think of our own, like, you ever read a Apple user agreement for iTunes or something? Yeah, I mean, it's like nobody reads them, and if they're not useful because they're so cumbersome, then what's the point? So I would just make them very short and clear, and get input from the kiddos, and then gauge to see if it works.
Right.
If it works, great. But I think at least doing a verbal contract where you go over things with kids, expectations and consequences of misuse, and so they understand, hey, this is a powerful device, and you're to keep the privilege or maintain the privilege of using it.
Right.
You need to use it responsibly. Let's talk about what that looks like. And again, it's more of a discussion than like, okay, sit down, I'm going to tell you how it is,
Right. Now, with my kids, we don't necessarily have a contract, but I do have to put the general rules in writing, because my kids will always say, but you said. And if it's written down somewhere, I can say, no, we wrote it down. You can't use your phone until 10 o'clock at night. It's 8 o'clock at night. So my kids that's their favorite phrase. But you said. So it's not necessarily a contract, but we do have to post like a couple of rules on the refrigerator, just so I have, hey, it's here. You saw it. I've sent it to you. It's on your phone. You have a copy of it. Just for that purpose alone.
I think that's good problem solving. That's the kind of where you see something, if it's recurring, like they keep saying, well, you said this or that, and it's like, no, well, let's clarify. Let's sit down and clarify what the rules are, and let's write them down. So, these are the official, official policy right here. So it, you understand it, and I think that's a good way to do it. And that's one of those where you find what works for your family. And we have to be adaptive. That's a really important part of parenting, is that it's weird because you hear consistency is important. It's true. And being adaptive is as well. Like if you have a rule of no yelling in the house or something, and there are consequences for screaming, maybe for younger kids, but like, if they screamed, "Mom, there's a fire in the kitchen,"
Right.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, we're going to have to impose our agreed upon consequence for that yelling in the household, even though you were trying to save the family.
Right.
So we have to make some adaptations, and we see what's working in our families and what's not. And when it's not working, then we sit down. We get on board with our partner too, but we try to pull our kids in and come up with something. And if they don't uh, participate, then it's like, well, okay, you might not have any ideas about this. If you do later, let me know.
Right.
But here's what your father and I have come up with, and what do you think? Do you understand it?
Yeah.
And if they give pushback, then that could be maybe there's some negotiation, but yeah, we find what works for the family.
Now, this question I ask because it's like I said earlier, I have a daughter that's about to start high school. When do you think a child should have a social media account?
When I ask parents this when I present, they'll say like 21. Well, so one is they're not allowed to have them till they're 13. So that's like,
Okay.
part of the user agreement that it's not for, so that at least we're on safe ground as parents. If our 12-year-old is saying, well, I want to be on Snap, hey, you have to be 13. It's
Mm-hmm.
not even an option. I would say sometime in high school,
Okay.
we have to, and it doesn't have to be all or none.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk to them about, the do's and don'ts. And hey, even if you have Snapchat, you still have to go to bed at a reasonable hour.
Okay.
Those don't go away just because they have, Snapchat or something like that. Ask them for, any concerns they have. One good conversation one with kids and teens is I like to ask this, is to say, do you know anyone that you see that you would say is addicted to their phone or addicted to their screen,
Mm-hmm.
addicted to video games? And invariably you'll get teens and kids say, oh yeah, I know, and oh, well, tell me about that. Now, it's much easier for kids to tell about another kid than to talk about when they're using too much. But you talk about these other kids and say, okay, well, Johnny, he's always on his phone. He's in class. He's pulling it out. He's Snapchatting. I can tell he Snapchats, late at night. He's, whatever. Say, okay, what about it? Where do you think it crosses the line? What is too much? When you see others using their phones, what makes you go, that's too much? Or their smartphone, their phone use bothers me. Have you ever been bothered or irritated by your friends'
Mm.
phone use? And so it's much easier for kids to talk about this when they're not talking about how they're overdoing it.
Right.
So you get them to talk about their own experiences, and they'll say stuff. It's really interesting what they'll say. And like I had a teen recently. He said, "Oh, my friend, I know this kid's addicted to his to video games," and he didn't even know I'd written a book. So I was like, "Oh, what makes you say that?" And he said, "Well, I hadn't seen him in a while, and went over to his house. My uh, parents went to visit, and I hadn't seen him in a while. And he said, hey, you want to play Xbox? And I said, yeah, sure. So I go and play with him. And after about an hour, I was like, okay, well, let's go do something else. And he said, okay, got a snack. And then he went right back in and played Xbox. And he said he played like 3 hours, like the whole time I was there. And
Wow.
I wanted to do something else. And he only seemed concerned about playing the game. It didn't really even matter that I was there. And I was like, I did the psychologist thing, said, well, how'd that make you feel?
Right, right.
And, he said, it made me feel bad because, it just made me feel like I didn't matter.
Right.
And so that was easier for him to talk about and others. And then you could flip it and say, okay, so a rule that you might have is that when you're in the presence of friends, you should pay more attention to your friends around you than whatever's happening on your screen. Oh, yeah, because that's the way they experienced it themselves. So they see the truth of it from their own experience rather than us telling them. And I think that's much more powerful. And I think as parents, to have these conversations with our kids is a really good thing. And it's interesting what they'll say and come up with.
Right.
So anyway.
Yesterday was Mother's Day.
Yes.
And we I have to, like I said before, 2 girls. So I asked them, or my daughter asked me Friday, she said, "What do you want for Mother's Day?" And I said, "Do you really want to know what I want for Mother's Day?" And she's like, "Absolutely." I said, "I don't want any gifts. I don't want any cards. I want to disconnect the entire day. For 24 hours, I want to not use your Apple Watch, your iPhone, your iPad. I just want a full day of family time." And she thought about it for a minute. My other daughter was on board, the oldest. She was on board with it. She always likes a challenge. My husband was on board, and my little one, who seems to be the most, the one I worry about the most as far as technology, because she's always on her phone. She said, "Well, if we do this, how am I going to know what the weather's going to be?" I said, "Well, we could go outside and check." And then she said, "Well, how am I going to know what time it is?" I said, "Look on the wall, look on the microwave." That was her response. But I will say that they did it the entire day. We turned everything
Wow.
in. We didn't watch TV. We didn't even go to the movies to watch TV on the
Wow.
screen. They did it for the entire day. And I noticed that we had a lot of conversation. We had more conversation in the car ride on the way to the mall than any other time. We sat and talked. We played games. And of course, we went to the mall. But the next day, they didn't rush to get their phones. I thought that they would. They didn't rush to get their phones. I'm actually the one that grabbed her phone first.
Uh-huh.
And my daughter said, "We should do this, every other Sunday." And now I don't know if that was like a line she was feeding me, but she said that it wasn't as bad as she thought it would be.
Yeah.
And it was
No,
the
that's
best
great.
Mother's Day gift I could ask
Yeah.
for. Absolutely.
Wow. What a powerful experience. Yeah, and that's one of those that's it's very rich.
Mm-hmm.
And to talk to the girls about, well, what were your expectations beforehand? What was it like after? What did you learn from this? And
Mm-hmm.
you're saying maybe we could do it every other Sunday. Or it could even be partial, where you go on an outing and everybody leaves their phones behind or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And or yeah, just finding a way. And I talk about it some in the book, but like carving out those times. And I call them now sacred spaces of
Mm.
where it's either dinner time or it could be a hike, where it's
Right.
like, let's leave the phones this time. And
Yeah.
a common one is, well, what about pictures? We want to preserve
Right.
the moment. And
Right.
it's like, what do we do with that? And that can be, do you have a digital camera? Is there
Mm-hmm.
some other in between way? Or, putting the phones on do not disturb and just saying, look, we all have to agree they're on do not disturb. I think that's a very powerful feature of the phone and
Mm-hmm.
underutilized. But if we learn to use that strategically, we could, in effect, knock our phones out and for a period of time, and then only have them visible and out when we need them. Like if we
Right.
took a picture with them, then they go back in the backpack.
Right.
So we're really trying to, use them and then put them up. And I think what's happening with youth now is they're just always in their hands.
Right.
It's like they don't know
It's
how to
attached.
walk without them. Yeah,
Right.
it's like an attachment. And I'm like, you know, when we walk, can we just walk? Can
Right.
we keep our heads up? Can we look other people in the eye? Can we smile and say hello? And
Yep.
maybe, our best friend is walking the other way and we won't see him because we're looking down at our screen and our best friend's looking down at theirs. And
Right.
I think is a good habit is phones are up when we're walking. I
Yeah.
think walking can be a great activity to just, be present,
Mm-hmm.
to look at the trees, listen to the birds or the cicadas or whatever.
Right.
Look around, say hi to people. And they found this level of social integration, these day-to-day social interactions. There's a lot of research that shows that loads very high on our longevity. It's our deep relationships and our day-to-day social interactions. The talking to the neighbor watering the lawn, or talking to the checkout person at a grocery store, and you can have these great little conversations and these serendipitous moments, but we're not going to have them if we are staring down at our screens. And this is a little value laden, but I would count those in-person social interactions in general as a higher quality than the ones on the phone. And yes, we can reach out to a relative and text our best friend after a breakup, or I don't know, to check in on them and say, oh, you look like you were feeling sad today. But again, going back to our evolutionary heritage, is all those were in person. And I think if we lose that too much, then we're going to start to pay a price. So yeah, we've got to carve it out.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Brooks, for being a guest on Raising Mommy and for addressing this hot topic for many, including myself. I appreciate you coming on and talking about the book. I will say that during the podcast, I did get a text from my daughter. She's homesick today, asking me for more screen time so she can play Roblox. So, but, I'm a work in progress. And as many parents. Absolutely. You can get a copy of the book Tech Generation, Raising Balanced Kids in a Hyper-Connected World on Amazon.com or the website techhappylife.com. There you can also find tech tips, which I love, read insightful articles like Game of Thrones meets the water cooler, and why we are so drawn to social media like moths to a flame. And you can find other more technology-related resources for parents. Be sure to find Raising Mommy anywhere you listen to podcasts. Check out new episodes every Saturday. Follow us on Twitter at RaisingMommyGA. Search for me on Facebook and Instagram at eatplantsforlife.com or Raising Mommy Podcast. And email me at raisingmommy@appenmediagroup.com. As always, thanks for listening.